So for today, our content will be that we are going to look at the meaning of variables and why we are supposed to use them. We are going to look at the types of variables. We are also going to look at how we are going to maintain the variables. Where we have so many variables, how we are going to maintain them. We're also going to look at data types and name conflict of variables. And then we are going to have practical or hands-on on how to use variables. Okay. So variables are temporal ways of holding data in your paragraph. So comparatively, if you look at a table, a typical table is quite permanent in that you can refer to it. You can use your Power BI to connect to that data source, and it is permanent. Now, variables are only used inside the app that you have created. It cannot be used outside your app. And in fact, there are various kinds of variables that we are going to see later that it can only be applicable inside a particular screen and not throughout the whole app. So we are also going to look at how to create the variables using sets, update context, and collections. Typically, there's another function called wait function, and the wait function could, in my view, could also be considered as a form of creating variable because it also holds data. And then we also have environment variables. But these two, wait function and environment variables, are outside the scope for today. Maybe we can look at it later. Okay, so what are the types of variables? Now, basically, we have three types of variables. We have the global variables, context variables, and collections. Now, when we look at the scope, we see that the global variables is applicable to the whole app, in that when you open the app, you can use the variable within so many screens at the same time. Context variables apply to a particular screen, and then the collection can also be created or used within or throughout the app. Now, they can hold all kinds of data, including Boolean, string, table, record. It can also hold numbers. Now, to create a global variable, we use a function called set. To create a context variable, we use UpdateContext. And then to create a collection, we use clear collect and then collect. So let's look. Okay, so let's take a practical look of going about variables in your app. So why variables? Typically, let's use an Excel to explain. I think a lot of us are quite familiar with how Excel operates. So I have this cell that I put 2, then I have another cell C4 and I put 5. In the next cell I can do 2 plus 4 and I'm getting 6. Now when I go to, this is sheet 2, when I go to sheet 1 and I want to make reference to this sheet, I may end up using equal to, then I go back to the reference, then I get 6, which is referencing sheet 2 D4. Now another way of going about this is to create a name range. So for example, B2, I want to give it a name, say my B2. If I go to sheet 1, instead of referencing sheet 1 directly, I can type 4 plus my B2. In other words, 4 plus the B2 that I renamed in sheet 1 in sheet 2, and that gives me 6. Now this gives a sense of referencing, assuming sheet 1 is a screen in Power App and sheet 2 is another screen in Power App. Now my B2 that I created in sheet 2 is representing a form of variable in Excel. So typically when we come to Power Apps, I have this text input 2 1, I have another text input 22. So let's say I put a name, John, then I have another name, Bismarck. I hope I got the spelling right. Now when I go to another screen and I want to make reference to, let me copy the name of the text box. You go to another screen and I want to make reference to the screen or the text box in another screen. Typically it will be text input 21, as the name is dot text, and so this references the name in a different screen, giving me exactly what is in that screen, which is John. Now this is one way of referencing a text input. Now another way of going about it, which is more efficient, is to use variables. So instead of keeping on referencing the name of the control, you can create a variable that ends up picking whatever content it is in that text input or table or wherever it is in another screen, and then for you to use it. Now, so let's look at how to create a variable. Now, as I said earlier, there are three major ways of creating a variable. We have using sets, using the update context, and then using the collection. Now let's begin with using the update context. Now to use the update context, I have a sample here. So I'm creating a variable which I have renamed var context. I just wanted to name to be a little bit clearer. And then we use the colon, and then we input or put whatever that we want to hold, the value that I want to hold in the variable. So in this case, I want to hold the name camp or boot camp in the variable var context. It can also hold true or false. So you can change the name. You can change whatever value you want the variable to hold to true. You can also put in figures. And so, but for this occasion, I just want to put in a text or a string. So in this case, this is holding a string. Now, if you want to get the value that is associated with this particular variable, then in the default of this text input box, we just place the name of the variable there. Now as at now it is empty, because even though we have created the variable, we haven't put it into action. So let's click on it. When we click on it, immediately we see that the bootcamp appears in the text input box or text box. Now this is an update context, and as I said earlier, update context variables are available to a particular screen in which the variable was created. So this var context is only available in this screen. So assuming, let's go to another screen. Let's go to another screen. Okay, so let's be here and then insert another, let's say insert a label, and then we put in the name of the variable. You see that it gives us an error. There is an error. It's an error because this screen is not aware of the variable that has been created, which is var context, which exists in another screen. And so let's go back. Okay, so that is update context. It is update context because it is contextual only to this particular screen. And this gives us a way of creating a variable that can be applicable to various screens. Now, the advantages of using an update context is that all variables hold up your memory. So as you create variables, what we are saying is that the memory being used by your system should hold this value, which is the boot camp, so that it could be reused. So it takes up your memory. Now, the advantage of update context is that immediately you move from this screen to another screen, the memory is cleared, or the space in which this variable is created is cleared. So it gives you a relief or more space to be used. Now, when you create a set variable that is global in nature, it exists in the system until the app closes. So before you choose whether you should go with update context or using set variables, look or think about whether you need those variables across the string, or you don't only need it for a particular screen before you choose. So where you are supposed to use update context, make sure you use update context. Where you are supposed to use set, make sure. Or let's create a global variable. And in creating a global variable, we use the set function. When we look at the set function, the syntax is that when we look at the syntax, we have variable and then value. So you give your variable a name, whatever name you want, then we give it a value. So in this case, we are setting this variable, which I have renamed var global, to 123. So it contains a number. So let's create or hit on the set context. When we create the variable and we look at this text box, this text box contains the name var global, which we created earlier here. So whatever is given to this variable appears in the text box. Now, when we go to another screen, unlike the update context that gave us an error, when we put the global variable here, we see that immediately it doesn't give us an error. The name or whichever value is contained in the global variable reflects. So that is the difference between a global variable, which is using set, and then an update context or a context variable. One can be used in one screen only, and another one could be used across the screen. Thank you very much. So there's another way of creating a variable using a collection. So simply put, I have this collect, and a collection, before I go ahead, a collection is a form of a temporal table that is created inside Power Apps. So if you have your typical table, which is permanent, normally the table lives outside your Power Apps, hosted maybe in Azure or Dataverse, on Excel, on your SharePoint, or whatever data source it is. But here the collection is created inside the Power Apps and doesn't live outside your app. So I am creating a collection. I've named it my call, and then I'm putting in this string, power platform. Okay, so that is on select of this button. Now in this text input box, I've put in the name of the variable that I'm creating with the text input box, or I'm creating with the on select of this button. So when I click on it, you see that the power platform appears inside this text box. Now I am using first my call.value. Now, when we put the name of the collection, just the name of the collection, as we did with the other variable, it doesn't work because the collection is a table and we can't put a table in a text box. Okay, so this is just the name of the collection. You see that we have an error. Expect a text. The error message is expect a text. Okay, because the collection is a table, unlike the update context and the set that we use a particular, which can contain both a table and a string. A collection is strictly a table. So in order to pick a particular value from the table, I use first my collection and then dot value, and that doesn't give me an error. Because it is a collection, you can also place it on a table, on the items of a table. So on the items of the table, you can go ahead and put the name of the collection on, for example, a data table, and that gives you a value as a column, and then it clearly shows on your data table. Okay, so before we move further, how do you know where your variables are? For example, you may have a variable like this global that you may have used it on several screens across several text boxes or several places in your app. Now, sometimes when you move to a particular screen, like we did earlier, you see that when we select the text of this text, just want to have a look at okay, we have this global. Assuming you have this screen that has this global variable, you may want to know where is this global variable coming from. Currently, because you just set the variable, you are very much aware that based on that bottom that this variable was created. But there are occasions that you get confused as to where this variable was created. Maybe you want to make some changes. Instead of 1, 2, 3, you want to put 6, 4, 5, or you want to put a text or a boolean instead of 1, 2, 3. So to find out where your variable was created or where your variable is located, for you to maintain or reuse or change some of the values, you go to view. Now for collections, you have your collections here, then you have variable. Now when you click on the variable, all variables that you have created are listed here. So under variables, we have global variable, and then we have variable that are associated with screen, which are update context. So let's look at the global variable first. On the global variable, you remember we created var global and we put in a number. So here clearly it shows that it is under the global variable, and the value is a text. Now when you further click it, you have 3 items. You have definitions, uses, and indirect uses. Now on the definitions, it gives you which screen and which button is creating whichever variable, and also gives you the formula for the variable. So if you want to maintain, you can easily click this and it will lead you to the particular variable for you to be able to change. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so we have the definition. Now when we have uses, now the uses tells you how many screens, or which of the screens, or which of the text boxes, which of the forms, which of the controls that you have used that particular variable. So we can see that we have used it in a screen called last record patch. There is a label 1 there we have used. That is what we use. We have also used it in a particular form 2. We have used it in text boxes. Now there's another tab called Indirect Uses. Now the indirect uses, so for example, you have a form, then inside your form you have a data card value, but you know that every data card value has a data card update. So the data card update picks from the data card value. So invariably, whatever you put inside the data card value has effect on the update of that data card. And so that data card makes use, the update property of the data card makes use of the global variable. So let's go to this form. When we look at this form, we see that the text box or data card value has a default of the global variable that we created. However, when we look at the data card itself, we didn't put anything on the update of this data card, but the reference that we saw there references this data card, because whatever we put inside the data card value has effect on the update of the data card, and that is why the indirect uses make reference to the data card value 7. I hope this is very clear. We are making indirect use of the card, but the direct uses are what we have here, because we went there and put this formula or this variable inside the text box or the label 1. Thank you. For collections, we can pick them from here, and so we can see that the collection that we created is here, Michael, and all the collection that you have, they will be lifted. So Michael, we have power platform as a value, because we just had a 1 column table that we created using the collection. Yeah, so that is the basics of creating. One way of clearing your variables or removing your variables is to completely remove the formulas. So immediately you clear the formulas, you see that the variables doesn't exist anymore, and therefore we get an error message. Let's put it back. Now another way is to insert another button and set the variable to blank. So for instance, we have this same variable with numbers, we put blank, and then immediately we see, even before we click on it, the variable is cleared and there's nothing. So that is one way, or the second way of clearing your variables. Okay, so let's look at this. What about if you have a variable that you created an update context and you created a set context or a set variable, or you created a collection that have similar names? What happens? So I created a variable. Let's go about it. We have this var context using update context. So this is a variable we have created using an update context. So let's create the same name using set. So set so we have set, then we give a value 455. So clearly you can see that the set has the same name as compared to the update context. Now we put the var text here, then let's put the same var text here and see what happens. Okay, so immediately we see that the bootcamp is also repeated. This is UpdateContext vartex bootcamp, and this is set vartex, which has the same name as the context variable, but has a value of 455. However, we are seeing the bootcamp being repeated for both text boxes. So this clearly shows us that when you create two variables using UpdateContext and set, or a collection, on the same screen, one is global and one is local, or one is not global, it is a contextual to the particular screen, we see that the UpdateContext supersedes the global variable. In other words, the UpdateContext take precedence over the global variable. I hope it's clear. Okay, the another test is, let's look at when we create two variables with different, we create two variables using the same variable. For example, we create two global variables, but we are going to use one for text and then one for numbers. So we have set global, and this is this contains a value. Let's create another with string. So let's say ABC. You see that we get an error. So we have set global 1, 2, 3. We have the same set global ABC. It gives an error. However, when we change the ABC to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you see that the error goes. We don't have error again. Now, what does it mean? It means that when you have the same name for the same type of variables, the data type should be the same. You create one variable for, say, global context or context variables. When one is true or false or a boolean, the other one should definitely contain a boolean. If it is text, the other one should contain text. Thank you very much. So having finished the basics, let's look at some advanced form of using variables. So some of the use cases, for example, getting the latest record using a variable. I have this form here, form 1, which is connected to application 5 data source. Now, I want to get the last record that I submitted based on a variable that I've set. So I have this form, submit form 2. Let's create so having finished the basics, let's look at some of the use cases, advanced use cases. So I have this form that I use to submit my data, form 2. What if I want the latest record? After I've submitted, I want the latest record in a variable that I can reuse in the app. So I have submit form 2, and then I have a new form. I also have a patch that I use for the but first of all, let's use the submit form. Now let's submit a new data. So let me see, ABC, customer Marian, department Agric. Then we submit. Okay, so this successfully submits the data that we sent into our database, which is an Excel database that I'm using. Now we see that what we submitted is not shown in our form. So to be able to do that using a variable, we have a property called onSuccess. So onSuccess of this form, we are going to create a variable using set. So we make use of set, and then set, you can use UpdateContext as well, but because we want to reuse it across the screen, we are going to use set. So set, let's create a name for it, last record. Any name that you give it, that will be better. Then the form name is form1, form2, and then there's a property called last submit, form2.last submit. Yes, so the last submit function, what it means is that whatever we successfully submit to the database, that record using form2 should be held in the variable last record. Okay, so this is one of the use of set variable. So let's do a new thing. So we have power platform Accra. Okay, then we submit. So having successfully submitted Power Platform Accra, it means that that data Power Platform Accra has been held in the variable the last submit. So let's copy to test. Let's copy the variable name, and then let's insert on the item property of this particular form. So the item property is what is shown when the form or the edit form, when the form is in edit mode. So let's put the last submit record there, and we see that because the last record variable held what was successfully submitted to the database, you see that clearly it is shown in our form Power Platform Accra, representing or reflecting the data that we submitted the latest. Now we can do the same thing using patch, because some of us we submit our data using patch instead of using forms. We may talk about that one too later, the differences. So let's set another variable, set. So set, and let's give it var my last record 2, var my last record 2, then we close the bracket. So we are, or the original formula is patch application default, meaning we are sending a fresh record or a new row into our database, and the columns, we have a customer, we have the department, then we have the description, all taking their associated text boxes on the form. So let's enter new data. So we have let's say Kumasi, customer Mike, then department ICT. Okay, so then let's save it using the patch. So we see that the data is successfully submitted. Now let's go to the form. Then we can grab the name of the variable. put it on the item property of the form, and we see that we have whatever was submitted latest using the patch reflecting on the form. So this is another way of using